Now, there are a bunch of different types of affixes out there, and we could list them all, but that would be absolutely absurd to do in English. So we're just going to learn two different classifications. One are inflectional morphemes, and these are morphemes that are purely indicating grammatical information. We have 8 of these in English that are completely inflectional. And then we have derivational morphemes, and these just change the meaning or category of a word, and they don't indicate grammatical information. And there are well over 500 of these in English. So the best way to approach this is to learn what the 8 inflectional morphemes are, and then understand that if you don't see one of those 8 inflectional morphemes, it is derivational. In a later morphology course, you might think of this less as a binary choice of a morpheme being purely inflectional or purely derivational, and instead think of it on a continuum, but that's a little bit advanced for an intro course. So here are the 8 morphemes that are inflectional in English, and we'll go through each of these in turn. This is just a nice summary slide. There's 2 for nouns, being the plural and the possessor. There's 4 for verbs, being third person singular, present participle, which is the progressive, past tense, and past participle, which would be your perfect. And then 2 for adjectives and adverbs, which are the comparative and superlative. So plural. Most nouns can be pluralized with s or es, so cat to cats, box to boxes, cemetery to cemeteries, but we do see irregular nouns as well. So for example, the ren suffix in children, this is the plural morpheme for child. Sometimes there's what's called internal change from goose to geese, so the vowel sound is changing in it. And sometimes we have what's called suppletion or partial suppletion, where the word changes pretty substantially, so person to people. But again, you can just think of the meaning of these. You know that goose is singular, you know that geese is plural, so you can identify that geese has a plural inflection on it. The genitive is all about the possessive relationship as well as relationships that fall under possession. There can be really specific ones if you get really into English grammar specifically, but just knowing the general concept of possession is good enough to understand a genitive. And to singular nouns, we add an apostrophe s, so Jack's pencil or a bat's fangs. And when we have plural nouns that end in an s, we do not add an s after, we just add the apostrophe. So countries, governments is both plural and genitive in this case. So in terms of verb inflections, we have our third person singular morpheme with s. So this is when you have a pronoun like he, or even a third person singular like the child when you're talking about a specific noun, and we see an s that goes on the verb. So he, she, it works compared to I work, which does not have the inflection on. Rufus escapes, or the company goes bankrupt. You wouldn't say the company go bankrupt, and you wouldn't say Rufus escape. You need that third person singular form. Some verbs do have irregular ones. So for example, for have, the third person singular version is has, and for be, the third person singular is. For our progressive aspect, which we call the present participle in terms of our inflectional labeling, this occurs after your auxiliary is when it's an ongoing action. So we've learned this in syntax. So basically, if you see is working, was being, are driving, or jogging, this is the present participle inflection. The regular past tense is just by adding ed to words. So that's typically what you see: work to worked, trust to trusted, amount to amounted. But you will see irregular past tense forms, like be is was or were, have is had, eat is ate. Go changes form completely to went, and do is did. So each of these words on the bottom have that past tense inflection. There's just no specific suffix or prefix that indicates it. It's part of the word change. And the last one is our perfect aspect. So this occurs after our auxiliary have, or even after our passive was. And this would say that an action has been completed relative to some point in time. So you usually see an ed on these, but in some cases you do see an en, such as in has eaten. And we do have these irregular forms as well. So for instance, be, you add an en to it and you get being. But there's some cases like we saw before, which is like had run, for example, Run just looks like a bare infinitive form, but it's actually inflected for perfect in this case. So we would label this as a past participle if we're giving it an inflection name. Now for adjectives and adverbs, we have comparatives and superlatives. Comparatives look at two things. So these are two things, and it picks one as having the most of that quality. So young to younger, cute to cuter, clums to clumsier. We know that when we compare two things, one can be younger or cuter or clumsier than the other. There are irregular forms as well. So good becomes better, bad becomes worse, and little can become less. You'll also see an inflection with the word more. So more fun in this case. More is a qualifier, fun is an adjective, and this qualifier has the comparative inflection built into it. For the superlative, it's just like the comparative. We add est, so young to youngest, cute to cutest, clumsy to clumsiest, and the irregular forms for the comparative will also have irregular forms for the superlative, like good to best, bad to worst, and little to least. You'll see in this case something like most fun, which again is a qualifier and an adjective, and most would have that superlative built into it. So this is used when we have three or more things and we want to identify which has the most of a certain quality. Who is the happiest? Who is the saddest? So let's practice with inflections here. Which inflections appear on the underlined words below? He was walking down the street without a care. Well, was is going to be past tense, and walking has that progressive marker on it because we have the auxiliary be before it and an ing on the verb. So we would say that this is a present participle in terms of its inflection. Have you slept yet? Well, this one is interesting because we do have. So if we think about the declarative form, you have slept yet, or you just have slept, because it's weird to say you have slept yet. What we actually have here is not the past tense, but the past participle, because in that verb chain, you have slept. We have our perfect have plus our verb with that irregular ending, which is the past participle form. Or have you been awake for 30 hours like me? We see the plural inflection on here, turning hour into hours. Okay, 3. Deadpool is the greatest member of X Force. So is, well, Deadpool's a name, so this is a third person singular form of be, and greatest is the superlative because we're saying out of at least 2 or more people, Deadpool is the greatest of them. Okay, 4th one. The person who was sleeping here left without saying his goodbyes. So sleeping, well, we have was sleeping. So this is going to be a progressive, which indicates that it is the present participle inflection. So hopefully that wasn't too bad. It was a little bit fast, but with these ones, once you've done syntax, they're not too bad. Now, derivational morphemes will change either the category of the word or the meaning of the word. We're not going to learn a bunch. I just have some examples down here, like the ment suffix in government, which changes a verb to a noun. Ant, which appears on words like inhabit to inhabitant. This is also a verb to noun morpheme. Love to lovable. This is a verb to adjective, able morpheme. Act to active. Again, verb to adjective, adding IVE to verbs. Work to worker. This is a verb to noun. And natural to supernatural. This one doesn't change the category of the word, but it does change the meaning. So this is like as in beyond natural. You can think of a synonym being beyond. So this is not inflectional. It's not talking about grammatical information. It's basically changing the lexical meaning of the word. So let's see if we can identify inflectional or derivational morphemes here. And the trick is in English, inflectional morphemes are always suffixes. So when they appear as affixes. So if you ever see a prefix in English, it's going to be derivational. So I was displeased with the service. This just means not pleased. So this is a derivational morpheme. Max sleeps every day at noon. Well, we know this is our third person singular morpheme, so this one is inflectional. She was Instagramming her food every time. So was Instagramming. That's an action. That's a progressive action. So this ing is the present participle. This is inflectional. Are you really nuttier than me? Okay, what is ly in this case? It's taking an adjective real and then converting it into an adverb. So because we have a category change, this is going to be derivational. And for the fifth one, this is the shiniest rock. We're talking about which rock out of many is the shiniest. So this is the superlative, and this is inflection. Now, one more problem related to this. This is kind of interesting. I know this slide is very wordy, but it's a very interesting problem. So Appalachian English has this affix a, and it attaches to certain words. And I'm going to give you some examples of sentences that are good or bad. So in 1, they were a fishin' by the bridge. That's fine. In 3, he was a huntin' murderous grizzly bears in the backyard. That's fine. 6, I am a shootin' my best. That is fine too. But 2, 4, 5, and 7 are not okay. They like to fishin' quite a bit. That's not what people say. He tried a shootin' them, but he missed. That's not what people say. If he ain't a stupid, I don't know what he is. Yeah, people don't say that. And they coulda eat some fresh meat. Yeah, they don't say that either. So what is happening here? What is attaching to in the good examples? Well, what I do see that it's attaching to is a verb. So is attaching to a verb. And it's attaching in a very specific place, because when we say he tried a shooting them, that doesn't work. So what do we notice that's in common with all the good sentences? Were, was, am. These are all forms of be. And which type of be in particular? The auxiliary. It's the progressive in this case. So actually, in Appalachian English, you can analyze this so-called prefix actually as a circumfix. So averbing is the present participle in Appalachian English. Of course, they can say it without but you can analyze this as a present participle, which is inflectional. So I did kind of lie when we said that English doesn't have circumfixes. Some dialects do. Now let's talk about some word change. So how do we create words and how do we classify those word changes? So internal change is a general category that accounts for sound changes, tone changes, stress changes, basically anything to do with phonetic changes. So for an example, sing to sang, we have a vowel change there. In Masai, we can see there's a change in tones. So the first tone stays the same, the last tone stays the same, but the middle tones change to be high rather than low. Spanish, bebe to bebe, we see a stress change, so the primary syllable gets moved. And in German, goes to ges, sure you can guess what word that means in English, we see a vowel change there too. So these are just word internal changes. Now there's suppletion, which is a little bit more involved, and suppletion is when an entire word changes. So in English, we have go to went. When you see suppletion, basically the idea is that the new formed word is unpredictable based on its base. So if you look at go and you have no idea what the past tense of go is, you would not come up with the word went. You would say goed. That would be the logical thing to come to. So suppletion is when you have that unpredictable word form. In French, for have to had, we have avoir to au. In Spanish, ir to fue. And then German, ist to sind for is to are. So in all of these cases, the form that comes out from the base is unpredictable unless you know the language. If it's partial suppletion, then we would just have some of the word changing. So one kind of questionable example is person to people. It's kind of difficult to tell whether this is suppletion or partial suppletion, but one of the important parts of the word, which is pu in this case, is kept the same. So I would argue this is more partial suppletion than full suppletion. Conversion is our most boring word change. This is when you take a word and you don't really change anything, perhaps the stress if it's multisyllabic, but the category changes. So, for example, ink. Well, you can ink something, that's a verb, but you can also use ink. So it can be used as a verb or a noun. It started as a noun and then it became a verb after. In the case of nouns coming from verbs, run was a verb, but now we can say I'm going for a run. So in other words, we're keeping the word exactly the same, but we're using it in a different category. Dirty is an adjective, but we could also say that you could dirty something, like you could dirty the table by putting a bunch of stuff on it. So it's kind of boring. It's just the same word used as multiple different categories. Clipping is very common, especially when it comes to giving people nicknames. This is when you take a multisyllabic word and then you just delete one or more syllables from it. So I'm sure a lot of people didn't know that the word zoo comes from zoological garden. It is a clip of that. So in other words, we're taking some part of the word and we're just deleting it. I'm sure you've heard of a fax machine before. Well, it comes from facsimile machine, so we're just removing that imile in the case, reducing it to one syllable. In the case of cellular telephone, we're taking two words and clipping part of each. So we're taking the eular off of cellular and the tele off of telephone, and that gives us cell phone. So that's just clipping. We're removing parts of the word. When we do blending, we take two words and we smoosh them together. So brother and romance becomes bromance. So we see a little bit of bro, a little bit of romance. We do see some connection between the vowel sounds, so we get bromance. In the case of jeans plus leggings, we get jeggings. So what you'll notice about these words too when we blend them together is that they have the meanings of both of these. And then if you want an example from Tagalog, tapas sinangag itlog becomes tapsilog. So this is where you take, you remove the A off tapa, you remove the nangag off the middle word, and then you take it off the last word, and you get tapsilog. Back formation feels a little bit like clipping sometimes, but there's some interesting history when it comes to back formation. And that is you have a word that is a longer form that looks like it has an affix on it. And then what people do is they remove that affix to create the new form. So for example, historically self-destruction came first, and it looks like this ion suffix would attach to a verb in order to make it a noun. So what people do is they remove that ion and they create the word self-destruct, which is a verb. So instead of adding an affix like you would expect, what's actually happening is a word looks like it has an affix on it, and people remove it to pronounce a new word. Same with donation to donate. Donation was the original word. We have that ion suffix on it. We remove it, and then we get the verb donate. Here's an interesting change from English 150 years ago to now. Peas used to be the singular of pea, but when we hear z at the end of nouns, we typically think of them as plural. So what people did was they removed the z off peas because they wanted to make it sound more singular. They thought it was singular if you remove that z sound, and now we have p as the singular. So back formation can be difficult to identify without some dictionary, at least historical knowledge of the language. But typically, if you're in an exam situation or assignment situation and you have to pick between clipping and back formation, clipping, you're not really just removing one affix, you're removing a bunch of syllables. With back formation, you're removing something that looks like a typical affix. I think our last ones here are acronyms and initialisms. So acronyms and initialisms look pretty similar, but there is a difference linguistically. Acronyms take the first letter in a bunch of words, and you can pronounce them as a word. So an acronym can be pronounced as a word. So the North Atlantic Treaty Organization can be pronounced as NATO. It has a phonetic transcription that we can use, NATO. As for as soon as possible, we can say ASAP. So that's how we pronounce it, ASAP. Initialisms, again, they look pretty similar, but you do not pronounce them as a word. You pronounce them each letter individually. So for Prince Edward Island, we don't call it pay, we call it PEI. For LMAO, I think us older people say LMAO, and then younger people say LMAO. So, I mean, really, if you say LMAO, it is an initialism. If you say LMAO in that transcription, then it would be considered to be an acronym. So it could change depending on how you pronounce it, the generation, the age, and so on. So let's ask ourselves, how are these words created? Which method of word creation was used? So if we take shark and tornado, we get sharknado. This is a case of blending. We blend two words together. What about babysitter to babysit? Well, we have this ER suffix on here, It looks like that's an agentive suffix that turns a verb into a noun, but actually babysitter came first. So this is an example of back formation. We're removing the ER to create a new word, which is a verb, babysit. Taki to tak-taki. Okay, here's an interesting one. This is not English. So what are we doing here? Well, this is just regular affixation. So we didn't explicitly label this as a word formation type, but just adding an affix to a word is considered affixation. And finally, snipe as a verb to snipe as a noun. Nothing is changing except for the word category. So this is just an example of conversion.